What's up, everyone? My name is Denzel Mensah. If you don't know me, I'm a life, personal development, and relationship coach, ENFJ, 911, social sexual subtype. And today we're going to be talking about the Phoenix of the Gold Coast and the concept of death, rebirth, and pretty much what it means to be a person. Let's get it. So this has been a long anticipated video. This is going to be a summarization of a lot of things that I have been brewing on and going through. And I feel like from recent videos, if you are connecting dots, a lot of you might have been able to already tell. For those of you who maybe follow me on social media, you probably have also been seeing the shift. For those of you in Ponder Palace, y'all already know the whole stories. But for those who might not know, for those who may not have been really keeping up and all of that, I'm finally ready to say that, yeah, I have shifted in a lot of ways that I've been thinking about things, the ways I've been seeing life. And it's more of something that's kind of just happened to me rather than something that I've chosen to do. But what I will say is it has made me a lot more confident in the way that I move, in the way that I perceive things, in the way that the way that I can move in my authentic self. And I've been very appreciative of that. Now, to go through all of these things in this one video would be really exhaustive, and I do not want to put y'all through that. So I will be breaking these kind of topics into different things. But what I will do, at least with this video, is kind of allow it to be the spark to opening up a whole bunch of different topics and different ideas that are going to be on my channel moving forward. And those are going to be coming through as I talk about it. But in the meantime, you might have noticed my current logo right now, and maybe like on Instagram and other stuff like that, I have an image that my great friend Lisa created for me. Like, she used artificial intelligence to make it. I asked her if she could actually make a picture of me with Ghanaian colors, red, yellow, green, and black, and a phoenix, which I've always really resonated with, but now more than ever. And pretty much allowing me to be represented through this imagery as the Phoenix of the Gold Coast. Both of my parents are both born in Ghana. If you watched my latest video with my father, then you know I tell a little bit about that story and my heritage in that way. But then also, I chose the Phoenix because the Phoenix, for those of you who might not be familiar, is a bird that, you know, it soars like all other birds and everything. But the thing that's very interesting about the Phoenix is that it dies often. It dies, and it pretty much burns itself into ash. And then from the ashes, it's reborn back into a new creature. And each time that it's reborn, it's better. And I feel like that has been very representative throughout my life. I would say at this point, I feel like I've had about 4 to 5 rebirths. And the first one that I can remember is when I became a Christian. And they call those, you know, things being born again. So that was like my first rebirth. And then I'd say probably like the second one was actually, as strange as it might sound, it was actually when I got into type. Because after I discovered that I was an ENFJ and all of that stuff, then like there was just a whole bunch of connections that were making sense for me. And maybe that doesn't happen with everyone, but it really radically changed the way that I was able to have confidence in myself. Because even though I was moving in a certain way and I was like, you know, I was confident in one way, I had still had some parts of me that I didn't really fully understand. And to be quite candid, Christianity, my faith in Christianity wasn't really answering that. Like, yes, I know that, you know, my image or my identity is found in Christ, but what exactly does that mean for me as an individual? Like there's different personalities, there's different ways. Like, so the way that I was made, the way that I was created, and as an individual, as Denzel, like, what does that mean for me? And that vague terminology of like, well, it doesn't matter, your identity is found in Christ, just wasn't enough for me. So actually exploring my identity more through the lens of being an ENFJ and everything has actually helped a lot over the years. And I feel like that would be, the first or the second rebirth that I had. And then I'd say the third one actually probably came with the deconstruction phase. And a lot of you probably do not know about that. Or a lot of you probably guessed it, maybe from watching videos over the past year or two. I feel like after I made my video with my friend Justiny on struggling with Christian beliefs and asking questions, then there was just a lot of things that, you could see the sincerity in my heart throughout that video as I was asking her questions and everything like that. And I was being transparent and open. But then over the years, since I made that video, and even before I had made that video, it got me, like, it was very tough to even get to that point. But then after that point as well, a lot of things spiritually, physically, emotionally, a lot of things just took place, and it really slowly morphed my view of the world and my perspective into where it is now. And I know that that could be really, or not even could be, I think it is. It's really disappointing for a lot of people. A lot of y'all probably don't even know this. You're probably watching this and you're like, whoa, what? Because it was something that was done on the inside, and it was very, very slow. I hung on very tightly, but yeah, I went through a deconstruction process, and just realized, for those of you who don't know what a deconstruction process is, it's essentially when you look at your faith, your faith background, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you are whatever it might be, and then you really start to see, like, wait, do I actually believe this? Why do I believe this? You pretty much tackle it with everything that you can so that you can see if it still fits, and you are being very honest with yourself. And a series of things really led me to this point where it was just like, yeah, you know what? I don't think that faith is enough for me in that sense, because there were a lot of things that I used to think were empirical, and then I found out that they actually were not. And that's a whole other video for another day, but that piece is something that's important to understand the rest of this video and the rest of how I'm going to be moving forward on my channel. But just also disclaimer, I still love Jesus. I still very much admire, I still very much see value in Christianity. I still see a lot of value in Christians in general, even though I myself would not necessarily consider myself anymore to be what most Christians would consider to be a Christian. I still believe in God, still pray, all of that, but I have very complex and intricate views at this point of time. And it's a lot more open-ended and a lot more, I honestly very firmly believe that I'm being more spirit-led now than ever. And it's interesting to see how this is, because the younger version of me would have never guessed that I'd be here where I am right now in my thought process and a lot of the things that I've explored and looked into. But that's also part of why I'm making this video, because when we talk about personhood, when we talk about identity, then there's an interesting thing about that, where you essentially, the way that I see it at least, it's as if, can you really track the trajectory of somebody's maturity and growth? And that's where, rebirth and being reborn really comes in. So anyway, we'll get there. But yeah, I would say that was like the third death and rebirth. And then the fourth one has now been my dabbling in a lot of different kind of what I would call esoteric pursuits. And that, once again, will be broken into different videos as I'm continuing to study and everything. But I've really been getting into a lot of things that I actually was really, really against in the past. And I know all of the reasons why the stereotypical Christian be like, no, stay away from tarot. No, don't do shrooms. No, don't do this. Don't do that. I get it. I was that person. And I also believe that for certain people, they shouldn't be doing these things. I believe very firmly right now in harmony. I believe in balance in the world. And I believe that God has everybody on a certain path for a reason. And so for that reason, if you do not agree with certain things in this way, by all means, stick by that, because I think that that's important for you. But I have also come to understand that for me, this was very necessary. And please understand also that in this video, I'm not even scraping the surface of like 5% of what it went through to have this death and rebirth and these paradigm shifts. But yeah, I would say that that's like the fourth rebirth that I've had. And the reason why I call it a rebirth is because to me, it's almost as if I'm a whole different person. Like who I am now versus like who I was back in high school and stuff like that. Like everybody grows, everybody matures, but usually you can track somebody's trajectory. You can see someone and then 10 years later, you can be like, oh, wow, like, yeah, you've grown, but you're still the same old Trevante, or you're still the same old whoever you are. You know what I mean? But you've just matured as who you were. So you could have predicted the trajectory of that person. But what makes it a rebirth, like a death and a rebirth, is that, in my opinion, you can't really predict. Like, it's almost like the trajectory went a whole different direction than what you were expecting. When I was in high school, if I were to think of myself right now, I would have had a very different kind of lifestyle. I would have had a very different kind of mindset. Sometimes I even think to myself, and I talk to my wife, and I'm like, man, younger Denzel would be so disappointed in the current Denzel, even though current Denzel is very proud of the current Denzel. But the younger Denzel had such rigid views about certain things and everything like that. And understandably so, that like if he saw me now, then he would be so disappointed, which my wife Jamila would actually tell me like, no, if anything, because you're still the same person, even though you're not, but you are, which is where we're going to get into with this video, then the younger Denzel would actually probably respect and appreciate it because it's you, because you're you. And I'm probably misquoting her to an extent, but hopefully it makes sense to you guys. And essentially what Jamila was teaching me, or what Jamila was like explaining, is that there's no such thing necessarily as being a whole different person altogether. But if you're defining it as having a whole different paradigm shift, then that's different. Because even then, there were times where, for example, I had a friend, Antonia Dodge, shout out to you, who years ago, like maybe about 3 years ago or so, we were walking out of a movie theater. So I watched a movie with her, Joel Mark Witt, Christian Rivera, and Beatrice Chestnut. And we watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which if you have not watched that, you should check it out. Especially if you're an NE user. The NE users love that movie. And I would say it is probably one of the top 3. It's definitely one of the top 3 most NE extroverted intuition movies I've ever seen. And maybe there's just a lot of context that I just was missing, a lot of SI context, so I couldn't keep up with the NE of it all. But it was definitely entertaining. Anyway, so we were walking out of that movie theater, and I remember that as we were walking out, then Antonia, and it's so funny because she says that she very vaguely remembers this, but she said something like, she was like, Denzel, you're a truth seeker. And so when the day comes that you start to question your faith and you kind of walk away from it, because it will, then you just have to make me one promise. And I was initially like, what? Does she not know how much I love Jesus? Like, how could she even say that? I was kind of like taken aback. Like, why would she say that? Like, what have I done? Even just That same weekend, I was evangelizing to Joel Marquette, who went to Liberty University with me. Not with me, but he went to Liberty University before I did. He was studying to be like a youth pastor and everything like that. So I was actually trying to reel him back in to Christianity. And we had this whole like 45-minute talk and everything. And I'm like preaching to him and like trying to like explain things. No, but Joel, you know, it's actually this and Jesus this and boom, boom, boom. And eventually got to the point where Joel just was like, okay, I understand. And I remember texting Jamila like, I think I planted the seed, you know, and Joel might come back and, you know, I really like address all of his questions. And now looking back, I understand that Joel was actually protecting me because he noticed that I needed that at the time. I still needed the faith at the time. There was no point in him like continuing to debate with me and everything like that. And especially like give any reason for me to walk away. And I do not wish to do the same for any of you. Like I said, I still have a lot of value for the faith and everything like that. But I just coincidentally do not believe that it's where God wants me right now. And it was actually something that I was supposed to be in previously. But the funny thing is, going back to that whole conversation with Antonia and then the conversation with Jamila about being like the same person and everything, is that Antonia was able to predict the trajectory that I was having. That just from me being a truth seeker, she was able to predict like, oh, a time is going to come where this is going to happen. Somebody could argue, oh, she probably planted that in my head and that's what started it. I really strongly doubt that, because if you actually know all of the several things that happened and I went through in order to get me to this point, which by the way was not easy. Nobody just wakes up and it's just like, yeah, I just don't want to be a Christian anymore. Like, well, I won't say nobody, but that definitely wasn't my case. Like, yeah, F all of this, you know, and let me just disappoint my family and be ostracized by my Christian friends who now all think I'm going to hell and stuff like that. Like, nobody does that, you know, just willy-nilly. And especially someone like me. I'm a very, very thorough and thoughtful person. That's not to say that people who still remain in the faith are not thorough and thoughtful people. We just see things differently. But it was interesting that from Antonia saying that she could see the trajectory of where I was headed, that even though back then that version of me from like 3.5 years ago would have been disappointed, or at least so I suspect, in the version of who I am today, because I'm still the same person, then that in a way has allowed me to, just kind of, it still shows and proves that I am indeed the same person. I've said a lot, but hopefully you guys are tracking with me. This is a very complex topic for me to explain, and honestly a little bit vulnerable. I'm still, even in real time, deciding how much to say and how much not to say. So without further ado, let's just move on with the video now. So, why the Phoenix? Okay, so this kind of started when I was actually at the Profiler training event earlier this year, back in May 2023, the Personality Hacker Profiler training event, and Dario Nardi was actually there. And Dario is both a neuroscientist and a shaman. So with that, not only was he teaching us a lot of neuroscientific things, but he was also having his own little sessions outside of class, like during the later hours. And so I remember for one of them, one of the first ones was, he was doing this thing called rapé. And this one I did not partake in, but I watched and observed as other people partook in it. And essentially it was this act of ground up tobacco and tree bark, and it's put inside some sort of tube. Tobacco and tree bark. Is that a New York type of thing? Do us New Yorkers say tobacco? Where I learned that from? Anyway, tobacco and tree bark ground up finely into this kind of like tube sort of thing, and then he blows it up into the nostrils of whoever it is. There is a feminine version, which is a lot more supposedly intuitive and softer and all of that. And there's a masculine one, which, you know, just leaves people very like, you know, whatever that might be. And then there's one that's like kind of like in between. Now, once again, I did not partake in this one because, honestly speaking, although I'm very open to all forms of enlightenment and everything, as I told my good friend Trey, the nose / the nostrils is one area that I do not need that from. I'll take it from the ears, the eyes, even the mouth, but the nose, I'm good on that. So that was the first thing, but I did watch, and apparently it's supposed to kind of like relieve you or like give you some type of like euphoric, like whatever, and you lay down. I don't know. Honestly, I just kind of observed other people do it, and it seemed like they were having their own thing as they were doing it. And it really like relaxed them. Granted, I don't usually deal with anxiety anyway, so I felt like, oh, I don't really, there's even more of a reason why I don't have to like do this. But after that, there was another little session or seminar thing where essentially we were doing a shamanic journey. And so for those of you who don't know what that is, pretty much what happened was we were in this room, and Dario and someone else, they were sitting in the middle as everybody else was in a circle. Dario had drums, and we all had these pieces of paper. And the piece of paper essentially told us to imagine a place in nature. And when you imagine this place in nature and you put yourself there, then you wait for a spirit animal to guide you and see where it takes you for like the next 20 minutes. So we all laid down. Dario started playing the drums, and I put myself in this place in nature. The first 2 tries that I made, I tried to put myself first in this spot called Old Man's Cave back in Ohio, but I don't know, we'll call it lack of SI. I couldn't really create the details in my head to be able to really put myself there. And so I skipped over to another place in nature that I was trying to like create. Didn't really work. But then I ended up remembering this creek area that I used to always walk along back when I lived in Virginia. And so, and I have a picture of it as well. And so with that area, then I was able to recreate it in my head and remember it. And I sat there for, I don't know how long, to be honest. But as I was sitting there listening to the water, then I saw an owl show up. And before the owl showed up, I was actually keeping my mind from creating its own animal in some way, because I wanted the animal to pop up by itself. I didn't want to project an animal into whatever this journey was going to be. It was my first time ever doing this. So I was just like, I was just being open to whatever the spiritual experience might be. So an owl showed up, and I was like, oh, I think that's what I'm supposed to be following. So I started following the owl, and it flew into this hole in a tree. So I followed it into the hole, and right when I got in the hole, I was falling and then floating in outer space, and the owl was right next to me. I freaked out for a little bit, but then I was able to calm myself back down. I was like, oh, okay, we're in outer space right now. This is really cool. So I'm looking around, looking at all the stars and all of the beauty and everything like that. And as we're floating, then I see this figure in the faint distance that we're floating toward. And as we were floating toward it, then I was really curious to see what it was. But the time was up, and we all woke up and we shared our experiences. Some people like went into the water, they saw mermaids and stuff like that. And I thought that I'd done it wrong. I was like, yeah, you know, I was supposed to be in nature, but I don't know if space counts as nature. And then they're like, actually it does. You know, that's really interesting. And apparently the 2 people next to me had also ended up in space. I don't know what that was about, but okay, cool. So then after that, the next day or 2, we had 4 different meditations that we were doing. Well, I think technically we did about 5 to 6, but the last 4 that we did were a series of meditations that were based off of the different subtypes of personality. And if you aren't familiar with the different subtypes of personality, honestly, just search any personality type and career with Personality Hacker, and then you'll see a video where Personality Hacker did for every personality type, and in those videos about like, you know, like ENFJ careers, then they describe what the dominant ENFJ is, the creative ENFJ, the normalizing ENFJ, and the harmonizing ENFJ. And all of these subtypes have their own energies to it. So we did a meditation that was like a dominant type of meditation. Then we did a creative type of meditation. And then we did a normalizing meditation. And then lastly, we did a harmonizing meditation. Well, harmonizing one was actually my favorite one. And essentially that one was really simple. You know, you're sitting down, you have one hand on your heart, and then you have your other hand like this, and you're just receiving whatever insight, whatever that pops up. So this actually reminded me of when we did the shamanic journey, which was funny enough, landed me right back in outer space with the owl. So I'm like, oh, okay, I guess the shamanic journey continued, part 2. So we started floating toward this figure again. This time we were a lot closer. And as we were floating toward the figure, I realized that the figure was actually me. I guess what I would call my higher self. So I'm like, whoa, that's really crazy. And it's holding something in its hand. And the image reminded me actually of Avatar Aang in one scene where he was like holding something, like some big ball or whatever in his hand. It looked actually almost very, very similar like that. Maybe my mind projected that for that reason. But instead of just some regular ball, it actually had the solar system circulating in between his hands. So we just kind of like sat there because he gestured toward us to like come closer. So we did, and we just kind of sat there, and I just sat there admiring the solar system moving in all of its beauty and everything like that. Even though no words were spoken, I received these downloads in that moment about harmony. And essentially the downloads kind of got to an understanding, or it gave me this understanding that you can see how all of these planets are not the same, but yet they orbit in a very clean manner. This is the definition of harmony. It's not necessarily making everybody carbon copies of each other. It's not necessarily putting everybody on the exact same page, but rather it's having all of these different people, these different ideas, these different ideologies, these different political things, whatever, and allowing them to be able to coexist with each other and move in a way where they do not clash with each other. That is harmony. You don't have to change the person. You don't have to change the planet. You just have to allow them to be able to orbit. And that was a mind-blowing thing for me. It's like, oh, wow, like it's such a simple concept, but also at the same time, it's really rich. And it reminded me even of like piano keys, and how even if you hit a C key on one end and then you hit another C key, you can still identify that, okay, these two keys are both C's, but they're not the same C key. And so from there, you're able to also understand like, okay, well, if these two are not really the same or whatever, and there's also other keys over there, then yeah, like they're not the same, but you can still make music out of it, which often is called harmony. And so in that same sense, this is how the ideologies of the world are. We need people who are Christians because they're going to be doing things and learning things and discovering things that maybe atheists won't be doing. And then we need the atheists because they're going to be doing stuff that maybe agnostics or Christians or Muslims won't be doing. And then we need the scientists, and then we also need these people. We need people, as crazy as it might sound, who believe that abortion is wrong because they help hold balance. But then we also do need people who believe that abortion is okay, as crazy as it may sound, because they also bring some sort of balance. We need people who have these different type of ideologies because they all serve their own purpose. That's at least the download that I was able to have in that moment. So from there, moving forward, then the next week or so, I had a shroom trip. And that I'm not going to explain in detail. But at this point, actually, I've now had 3. And each of these experiences have been absolutely wild, but very enlightening, very, very, honestly, I would say that it really tapped me into the spiritual realm. It really tapped me also into knowing more about myself. And the first time I took a heroic dose, I was like, hey, you know, is this going to give me a heart attack? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay. Is this going to make me become crazy and go outside and like play in traffic? They're like, no. I'm like, okay. Is this going to, you know, I forgot what else I asked. They're like, no. And I'm like, so really the only danger with this is just whatever I might face within myself. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, well, I've already done a whole bunch of shadow work at this point because things have kind of like forced me there. You know, as you all saw with my shadow work video, I really had worked so much on myself at that point that I was ready to kind of close out that chapter or continue that chapter by continuing to explore myself. And after that trip, it kind of brought everything that I had been going through together. And that whole night, which, you know, I spent it with my friend Lisa and her husband Matt, and then my friend Will. We were all in Florida for that time being. And like I said, I'm not going to give you the details of it. A shroom trip is about like 6 to 8 hours. So you can imagine how crazy that was. But it was very enlightening for me. And it really did connect so many dots that were still, you know, floating for me. And then in October recently, I took another one with my dear friend Kirsten. It was her first time, and I actually guided her throughout hers. This time we took about 2 point something grams. You know, the first time we took like 5 point something grams, me and Lisa and the rest of them. This time we took 2 point something grams. And then just yesterday, the day before yesterday, I took another trip, like one last one. And that one also had its own very interesting experiences that could be shared in another day. But all that to say that throughout all of this, a lot of my thoughts on life had shifted. A lot of paradigm shifts had happened. And I'm in a very different phase of my life. And who knows where I'll even be 5 to 10 years from now. But to me, I definitely feel once again like reborn in a way that's like, this is a very different, according to me, kind of chapter or Denzel than it was back in like college and then also like in high school and stuff like that. And with that comes, you know, different kinds of friends maybe, and, you know, different kinds of, you know, challenges I'm going to be facing, and then also different types of victories I'm going to be facing. And with this, I have to be very vigilant and I have to like move in a certain way. But I am operating probably with more peace and happiness and authenticity than I've ever done before. Even stating all of this on camera and everything, and risking people now seeing it, which thanks to the shrooms, I've really arrived at a place where I don't really care anymore. I was petrified of making this video. I was petrified. Oh my gosh, all these Christian followers are gonna be like, oh my goodness, like you're being deceived by Satan, you're gonna go to hell, blah, 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 all of this stuff. And I understand. I fully 100% understand. Trust me. I was there, you know. And again, it's not to say that I'm trying to convince any of you to also shift your mind in a certain way, because again, I really do believe that we are all where we are for a reason. But what I'd say to you is, worst case, continue to pray for me. Like I said, I still believe in God, and I still believe in divine orchestration. So I really do believe that where I'm at, where you're at, all of it is with purpose. And like I said, it wasn't just, I didn't just wake up one day and then all of a sudden decide to be where I am now. So if you really do believe I'm in the wrong place right now, mentally or whatever, I am not against prayer. But I do ask that you respect where I am now, you hold space for it, and you keep your mind open to it. Not in a way for you to be influenced, changed, and become like me, because that's probably not the path for you. You have your own path that you're walking on. But to be open to it for me, and also at least know and remember that it's still the Denzel that you know, probably even more so now, that's really studious, really is very deliberate with the decisions that he makes. And he's going to always continue to be this way. So that being said, yeah, the Phoenix of the Gold Coast. I do not know when the next death and rebirth will happen, but it seems to be something that's very prominent in my life. And also on that note, this has launched me really deeply into actually learning about something or a few things that a lot of people back in my Christian circles, including myself, really like forbid, which is astrology. As of last month in October, I have dedicated like 3 weeks to just diving super deep into astrology, learning everything I possibly can about it, about chart reading, about stuff like that, and really trying to understand it from an archetypal sense. For those of you who are astrology nerds or whatever like that, yes, I'm looking at tropical, although I am going to be looking next at sidereal, and I'm also going to be then looking at even like Vedic, I believe, so I have like a lot of like resources like lined up in that way. But from my tropical chart, it's really crazy how much accuracy that has. And even when it came to astrology back in my Christian days, I never really said that it was wrong. I was just telling people that it's not supposed to be used to replace God. And even at this point, I don't think that it is something that's being used to replace God, just like I don't think that type is being used to replace God. I think that these are all tools to be able to help you, especially when you understand archetypes. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't understand. But there's a lot of accuracy to this. And I think astrology actually brings you the questions necessary to be able to really explore the certain terrain and then show you the spiritual path that you're supposed to be going on. So looking at my north node and my south node has been really crazy. Like understanding like how much Scorpio is in my chart, with the Scorpio stellium on top of also having a Scorpio north node, and then having a Scorpio Venus, if I remember correctly. It's like there's just so much going on with me in that realm. And I did not know anything about this, or much about this, even a few months ago. But as I've been learning recently, it just all makes sense. And Scorpio is actually characterized as a death and rebirth. Scorpio is all about the darkness, the taboo, and, pretty much the shadow and all of these other things of that nature. And that has always been me. I remember even when I was, really strongly identifying as a Christian, I did not know why, but for some reason I was always more intrigued in learning about demons and all of that. Even though I don't worship demons, there's nothing like that, so don't get any ideas. But I always was very fascinated with, demonology and stuff. And I found that more intriguing and alluring, even more than, just learning about Jesus in general, and stuff like that. And I know that that could probably spark a lot of thoughts for certain people. It is what it is. But I think that all of this Scorpio in my chart really does signify a lot, especially since it is actually archetypally known as death and rebirth, which goes back to the Phoenix thing. And I had titled myself the Phoenix of the Gold Coast before I even knew about all of this Scorpio stuff. Sagittarius sun with an Aquarius moon. I've always identified with the Aquarius moon, even before I really related to Sagittarius sun things. Oh, they say Sagittarius are jerks and Sagittarius, and they do this and they do that, and I was, oh, this astrology stuff is not real. But then Jamila would send me memes on Aquarius moon and stuff like that, and I'm like, okay, no, this is wow, this is really spot on. And that was probably the door that made me be okay, yeah, there's some truth here, because this is way too much of a coincidence. And then, just learning about all of, again, the, having a Libra rising, and then the Scorpio elements there. Like these 4 signs really do seem to be very strong in me. And from there, you know, the next chapter is also tarot, another forbidden thing. You know, again, I'm approaching all this in an archetypal sense. And I think that knowing and understanding archetypes is something that really will help me. It continues to sharpen my intuition. Just like when I was learning about Jean Shinoda Boland's gods in every man and goddesses in every woman. It doesn't mean that you're possessed with Zeus or you're possessed with Hermes or whatever like that, but it's just talking about literal like archetypes or like, you know, kind of like ways in which you can see yourself, energies within you that are already there, and you're just putting a name to it to better understand it and to describe it. So with this, I see all of this as a way to be able to further understand people, further understand the world around us, further understand the psyche, and just sharpen over like a lot of your intuition in general. And so that being said, yeah, as I continue to sharpen all of my skills and knowledge and everything with the help of my friend Jessica, as we plunge into all of this stuff together, and just a lot of other things too. You know, I have a few friends who've been actually diving into a lot of these different topics with me, and I appreciate y'all. Ponder Palace, I appreciate y'all as well. You know, we always having great discussions on these things. I appreciate y'all always like, you know, accepting me and teaching me so much. This has really been a very rich year, and as it's coming to a close, I'm actually really excited to, like, next year I'm going to be 30. That's crazy. And I feel like all of this is happening at the right time. Maybe this is Saturn return. Who knows? Ooh. But yeah, tarot, astrology, shrooms, and other things you'll be seeing me talk about on this channel in the future as I continue to break out of my shell more and accept that, yeah, this might change and shift the audience that I have a bit. I'm still going to be talking about type and all of that, but yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching this far. If any of y'all would like to discuss this more in depth with me, then hey, check out denzelmensah.com. With my coaching, you know, you can get a profiling session. Sure, you could also get relationship coaching, and then if you just get like a regular coaching session, that literally also counts as just an hour with me to just sit down and kick it and talk about whatever. So if you have like, if you really want my like one-on-one undivided attention to like, hey, so I watched your video, Denzel, and you know, you were talking about this, you were talking about that, whatever. And if you're willing to like, you know, dish out the cash for it, you know, because a brother's still got to eat and pay rent, pay bills and all that, then yeah, I'd be more than happy to sit down with you for that time period and, you know, really discuss and maybe even help you go through some of the things that you're maybe working through and answer any questions that you might have. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, like it. If you didn't enjoy it, feel free to unsubscribe. I understand you're not forced to watch this, but thanks for hanging out anyway and for being here throughout those chapters of my life. I appreciate it. And yeah, continue to pray for me if you like. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way, but just, you know, continue to just make sure that like you're covering me spiritually and all of us are just moving in the way that God, the universe, the divine has appointed for us to be moving. So yeah, that being said, I think that's everything. Thanks again for watching, and do not forget, you matter. Done. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and if you enjoyed that, please like and subscribe. It actually really helps out my channel a lot so that more people who actually care about what I want to say can actually find me a lot more easier. Also, if you did enjoy it, then maybe you'll enjoy a lot of my other content as well, so be sure to check out some of my playlists where you'll be able to find a lot of my older videos and older content. And last but not least, if you would like any profiling sessions or coaching sessions, be sure to check out denzelmensah.com where you'll be able to book me and you'll see the rest of my services. But thanks again and have a great day.